In April of 1988, a $1,500 mine punched a 15-foot hole in the side of a $122 million US warship. The mine was a Russian design from 1908. The frigate's keel broke, 2,000 tons of seawater flooded the engine room before the crew stopped the flooding. And that same weapon, same year of design, same hollow lead horns, is sitting on the floor of the Strait of Hormuz today. And about 20% of the world's oil has to cross over it. The first big question is, what happens if one of these mines explodes? And we'll get to that, but first, let's take a look at how they work. So, a naval mine is a weapon designed to do one job: put a hole in the ship before the ship knows the mine is there. The most common type, the one that hit the Samuel B. Roberts in 1988, is a contact mine, a steel sphere anchored to the seabed, floating at depth in the water column. The top half is studded with hollow lead horns. Inside each horn sits a small glass vial of sulfuric acid above a dry battery. A ship's hull crushes the horn, the vial breaks, the acid hits the battery generates a current, and 115 kilograms of TNT detonates against the steel. That mechanism was patented in the 1870s and still works in seawater 150 years later. But modern mines? They're smarter. They listen. They sit on the seabed and wait for the magnetic signature of the steel hull, or the sound of a propeller, or the pressure drop of a loaded supertanker passing above. Some are programmed to ignore the first 10 ships that pass and detonate against the 11th, which means a cleared channel can quietly become dangerous again by the next transit. Now, the worst case scenario. When one goes off underwater, two things happen in sequence. A shockwave moves through the water at the speed of sound, peaks at pressure thousands of times higher than the atmosphere, and rips into the hull. Then, a steam bubble expands beneath the ship, collapses, and forms a focused jet of water that can punch a meter-wide hole straight up through the keel. And that's what broke the South Korean corvette Shonan in half in 2010. And for the shipping industry, that's where things get really dangerous. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. The international shipping corridor inside it is only about 6 miles wide. A few $1,000 mines anywhere in that band can make insurance underwriters refuse to price the route. In March of 2026, war risk premiums for a single tanker transit climbed from around $125,000 to as much as $8 million. Tanker traffic collapsed by 70% inside a week, so Iran never even had to actually sink a ship. Making it plausible was enough. So why mines and why here? Well, Iran's Navy cannot fight the US Navy head-to-head. The American fleet is bigger, faster, and better armed by orders of magnitude. The Iranian playbook starts with that fact and works backwards from it. A weaker Navy has to make the cost of being in the water too high for the side that's stronger. Mines have been the answer to that problem for almost 2 centuries. For example, in 1950, North Korea, a country with no real navy at all, delayed a US amphibious landing at Wonsan by more than a week with Soviet-supplied contact mines floated into the harbor by fishing boats. The American admiral commanding that operation said his navy had lost command of the sea to a country without one. And Iran built its entire naval doctrine around that idea. The regular Iranian Navy still operates the older Blue Water Fleet inherited from the Shah. But the force that actually controls the Persian Gulf is the Revolutionary Guard Navy, the IRGC. Hundreds of fast attack boats, drones, coastal missile batteries, and somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 sea mines, many of them produced inside Iran. Since the 1990s, the force has rehearsed one scenario over and over again in exercises called Fajr and Ashura. And that scenario is closing the strait. And the geography is exactly the kind of place the doctrine was designed for. Iran controls the entire northern coast of the strait. It owns 7 of the 8 major islands inside it. Its primary naval base at Bandar Abbas sits directly across from the international shipping lanes, close enough that a small boat leaving the Iranian shore can be in foreign traffic in under 15 minutes. Iranian state media calls those islands the aircraft carriers that never have to leave. Iran has been threatening to close the strait for more than 40 years. Until February of 2026, it had never actually done it. When it finally did, the geography did most of the work. A handful of mines, somewhere in that 6-mile corridor, becomes the question the insurance market cannot answer. So, what does the US Navy do? Well, finding and destroying a mine is harder than laying one, by a lot. The Navy's own working estimate is that clearing 20 mines from the Strait of Hormuz could take up to 6 months. Iran is believed to have laid at least that many, possibly several times that many. Iran itself reportedly can no longer locate all of them. Every mine has to walk through a 5-step sequence before it can be defeated. Detect the signal, classify whether the signal is a mine or a sunken oil drum, identify the specific mine type, localize the precise position, then neutralize it. Skip a step and a ship sinks. The Strait of Hormuz makes every one of those steps harder. The water is salty, warm, full of silt from the Iranian coast, full of tidal current, full of decades of dropped anchors and sunken cargo containers. A typical sonar pass through the water generates dozens of mine-like contacts per square mile, almost all of which turn out to be junk. There are really only 2 ways to defeat a sea mine, and neither has fundamentally changed since the Civil War. You either trigger it on purpose at a safe distance, called sweeping, or you find it and blow it up where it sits, called hunting. Every modern American mine warfare system, from billion-dollar littoral combat ships to torpedo-sized robot submarines, is a more elaborate way of doing one of those 2 things. Now, let's take a look at the ships and aircraft doing the mine clearing. For decades, the workhorse was the Avenger class, 14 small minesweepers built between 1987 and 1994, with wooden hulls coated in fiberglass and non-magnetic engines, specifically so they could sail into a minefield without triggering the mines themselves. The Avenger could pull a variable depth sonar through the water on a cable, find a contact, then send out a small remotely operated vehicle that swam to the mine, cut its mooring, and let it surface to be destroyed with rifle fire. 4 of these ships were forward deployed to Bahrain for years. In September of 2025, the Navy decommissioned all 4. By January of 2026, they were on a heavy lift transport ship bound for a maintenance facility in Philadelphia. 8 weeks later, Iran began mining the strait. The Navy's most proven dedicated mine clearing ships were suddenly thousands of miles away from the exact place they were built to operate. The airborne side of the same job is the MH-53E Sea Dragon, the largest heavy-lift helicopter in the West, operational since 1986. The Sea Dragon's job is to pull sonars and sweep gear through the water behind it, cable cutters, magnetic generators, acoustic noise sleds the size of small boats. The whole point is to make the helicopter look, sound, and feel like a steel warship to the mine below. The mine fires harmlessly behind the sweep gear. That principle worked at Wonsan in 1950, and it still works. The catch is the helicopter itself. The Sea Dragon dates back to the 1980s. It's expensive to operate, takes a small army of mechanics to keep it in the air, and has been on the Navy's retirement list for years. The plan was to hand its job over to a mix of smaller helicopters, surface drones, underwater drones, and a new Littoral Combat Ship. A whole web of lighter systems doing in pieces what one big airframe used to do on its own. The problem is that the mines never stopped being effective. If anything, they've only gotten cheaper and smarter. So, at exactly the moment a choke point, like the Strait of Hormuz, becomes dangerous again, the Navy is walking away from the platforms that have actually done the work and betting on replacements that have never been tested at this scale in a real-world crisis. The center of that bet is the MH-60S Seahawk, working off the deck of a littoral combat ship, smaller than the Sea Dragon, lighter, faster, and almost entirely reliant on drones and sensors to do the work the old airframe used to do with brute force. The Seahawk carries a blue-green laser system called ALMDs that scans the top 50 feet of water for mines floating near the surface. For anything deeper, it carries a launch tube for the Archer fish, a torpedo-sized one-shot drone on the end of a fiber optic cable. The operator drives it down to the mine, looks at it through a live camera feed, confirms it's actually a mine, and then triggers a shaped charge against the hull. Nothing gets destroyed unless an operator has seen it on camera first. That's the safer way to do it. It's also the slower way. The bottom mines, the hardest ones to find, are the job of unmanned underwater vehicles. The Knifefish is a 22-foot robot submarine that runs for 16 hours on its own using a synthetic aperture sonar that can resolve objects on the seabed down to a few centimeters. The smaller Mk-18 family runs the close-in jobs out of inflatable boats. These systems are real and they work. They were used in the Gulf as early as 2003. The problem is reliability. The Government Accountability Office found that LCS mine-countermeasures package came in roughly 70% over budget, with the mine hunting technology operationally available only about 30% of the time. One Navy test report measured a mean of 12.7 hours between mission failures on the Seahawk's mine hunting system. The Avenger could stay in a minefield for weeks. There is one more system. Since the Vietnam War, the Navy has trained bottlenose dolphins to detect mines in shallow, cluttered water that no human-built sonar can read cleanly. Roughly 77 of them are based in San Diego right now. The Navy spent more than $20 million trying to replace them with the knife fish. Congress reviewed the results, decided the robots weren't good enough, and wrote into law that the dolphins could not be retired until the technology that replaced them was demonstrably better. For example, in 2003, dolphins helped clear more than 100 mines and booby traps from the harbor of Qasr to open the port for relief shipping. In 2026, they are still on the job. Some military dolphins unfortunately have died during service over the decades, but the US Navy states that the mine detection dolphins are not treated as suicide assets and are not intended to die during operations. The dolphins are trained to locate mines and mark them for human operators rather than to detonate them directly. Clearing the strait is the job in front of the US Navy right now. It means working a 6-mile shipping corridor end to end with sonar, drones, helicopters, and divers, and possibly dolphins, though that hasn't been confirmed. The work itself is the full detect to engage sequence on every contact, ignoring the false ones and confirming every real one by camera before a charge goes anywhere near it. Up to 20 mines, possibly more, in a water full of silt, current, and decades of underwater clutter. The Navy's own estimate is that it could take up to 6 months. That's what mine warfare looks like in 2026. Slow, careful, and unavoidable, because there is no shortcut for finding a few $1,000 weapons hidden in a waterway that carries a fifth of the world's oil. Subscribe if you want more on how the built world actually works. I'm Tristan, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.